for staying. Thanks for allowing me to present OssDsign. We are an Uppsala-based company. We are, since May this year, publicly traded at Nasdaq First North. Our roots are in Uppsala, but we have, even though we're in an early commercial phase, we've already made a bit of a global mark, I hope. Okay. It started with unmet clinical needs. If you go to a few of these presentation events and hear a few medical device and medtech companies, I'm sure that you hear this quite a lot, but in our case it's actually true also. We are looking at pictures of complications that you see with traditional implant technologies for reconstruction of the skull and the face. To the top right, you see a typical infection picture, right there. In the US, this is about $100,000 problem to the hospital if it occurs within the first 3 months, and they have to carry the cost for it. These complications are not uncommon when traditional implant technologies made from inert plastic materials or metals such as titanium are being used. The infection I was talking about could be prevalent in about 10% of the cases, depending on which study you look at. And when this happens, the implant has to go out. The patient has to recover, and a new implant has to be put in. So with our technology, we have shown in clinical studies that are peer-reviewed and published that we can get down to 2% of these infectious complications that require implant removal. So what is it that we do? We do custom-made implants for cranial and facial reconstruction. Our process works in a way that we get image data from our customers, normally neurosurgeons, CT data that we analyze. We design an implant that we propose to the customer. The customer then looks at it and either approves it or comments it and maybe asks us to make minor modifications and changes to it. So we can have a dialogue back and forth with our customers. And all this takes place on a web platform that is secure and protects the patient integrity. We can do it from Uppsala, serve customers worldwide. Once our customers have approved the implant, they also approve the cost of the implant. All our implants are individually priced depending on the size of the implant and the complexity of the implant. Once everything is approved, we start manufacturing, and that takes about 4 weeks, and then we deliver the implant sterile and ready for surgery and to any market we serve. So what is unique with our implants? Well, unlike the implants I mentioned earlier and showed the nasty pictures of the complications with, our implant is made from a composition of calcium phosphates. So it's a ceramic material that has the unusual but very good characteristic that when implanted into the human body, it slowly but surely remodels into the patient's natural bone tissue. So we build bone back by using our implants. This is a calcium phosphate material. It's a ceramic material. By nature, these materials are brittle. So the other pillar of our technology is our ability to reinforce the material with strong 3D printed titanium, as you can see in this picture to the right-hand side, where we kind of digitally shaved off the ceramic material. So what we're doing is really, we're taking an old concept of reinforcing concrete and we're applying it to the implant area. So we're combining the very good mechanical capacity of the titanium with the really unique biological features of our proprietary calcium phosphate composition. These are the products we have on the market currently. A lot of focus on OssDsign Cranial PSI, which is our patient-specific cranial product. But we also do patient-specific cranial accessories, which are plastic details that are used for making a neurosurgical procedure such as a cranioplasty easier, safer, faster. They're much appreciated by our customers. We also just recently released this product and introduced it to our direct markets in Europe and in US. It's called CranioPlug. It's a burr hole filler. When you don't have to take out a lot of bone for a cranial procedure, you can do with just drilling a hole. And CranioPlug is intended to fill and cover that hole. It builds on the same principles and the same concept as OssDsign Cranial. It's a combination of titanium and this bone regenerative ceramic material that we use. So it's intended to be an off-the-shelf product. It serves the same customer groups, but it's a high-volume product, targets neurosurgeons like OssDsign Cranial does. And then we also have OssDsign Facial patient-specific implants, which are, again, the same concept, titanium-reinforced ceramic implants that have a bone regenerative capacity, intended to be used for reconstruction of facial defects. That could be the results of a congenital defect or a tumor or trauma. So, commercially, we are selling directly with our own sales teams in our home market in Sweden, as well as in Germany and in the UK. We have distribution partners in Spain, Italy, Austria, and in Greece. And we are about to launch in France. We have been just recently received access to the French national reimbursement systems. So we will be one of 3 products for cranial reconstruction that have access to this reimbursement system. So we're currently in discussions with partners, and we're very much looking forward to a launch in France as well soon. Our most important market, however, is the US market. I'll come back to that in a little while in some more detail. As I said, we went public in May this year. Here are a couple of highlights from what's been going on since. It's been busy. As I mentioned, the reimbursement in France for OssDsign Cranial came through recently. In the UK, we've been listed with the NHS and received a contract with them, which, without getting into too much technical details of the contract, basically allows or makes it easier for UK hospitals to order our products, and it makes it easier for them to pay us. So it's a very good foundation for continuous growth in the UK. I also said we launched CranioPlug in our direct markets, and we're currently rolling it out for clinical evaluation purposes, and everything's looking good. In the US, we have large things going on. For those of you who have followed us a little while, you know that we went into the US with a setup where we used a master distributor company in California. They had the legal and the logistic responsibilities for distributing the product. And they also built a distributor network of local and regional distributors throughout the US. As we announced as part of the IPO process, our intention has always been to take over this responsibility ourselves. And that's what we're doing right now. We've set up our own US organizations. We've set up a US office. And we are currently staffing up our US organization. At the same time, we're optimizing our distributor network in the US. FDA also recently cleared our cranial accessories, so that hopefully will help to drive sales even more in the US. And also in the US, CranioPlug, as I've talked about, has been launched and is currently at many hospitals undergoing what is known as a VAC approval process. VAC stands for Value Analysis Committee, and it's basically a way for each and every hospital to evaluate that any product that wants to come into that hospital can show that it has a clinical benefit that sort of outweighs the costs. Otherwise, they would be flooded in new products. So all our products have to undergo a VAC approval process at each and every hospital in the US. And the number of US accounts is accelerating steadily, and I think during the last year we've seen more than 30% of our current customers have come over the last year. So I'll get back to details on the development in the US. Exciting things also in Japan. We filed recently during summer for OssDsign Cranial with the Japanese regulatory authorities. So that file is undergoing review. And while it is going through the review process, we have identified a market entry strategy, and we are in partner discussions. Due to some very high initial interest in our products in Japan, we were able to collaborate with Japanese neurosurgeons, and under an ethical approval, they could do surgery prior to the regulatory clearance. And this was done last winter, the first surgery. So in October, during the annual neurosurgical meeting in Japan, the initial data was presented, and everything looks very good. And this surgery team has decided to expand the series and use both OssDsign Cranial and OssDsign Cranial Plug. So the hope is that once we get the regulatory clearance and we have signed a distribution partnership, we have access to some Japanese clinical data, and we can kind of hit the ground running when everything is put in place. So some financial highlights from our Q3 report. Sales are growing, and that's good. We saw an uptick of the sales in the third quarter compared to last year with 41%. That was in large driven by a strong development in the US, where we more than doubled our sales compared to last year. However, as I mentioned initially, we are still at an early commercial phase, so comparing our sales data to last year, it's a little bit silly, to be honest. So what we should be doing is probably look at the quarterly growth. In US, then, our most important market, we had a bit of a hiccup earlier in the year, mainly attributed to the fact that we announced that we were going to take over responsibilities from the master distributor, and I think this shook up the market a little bit. However, third quarter, we're back on track. We also see that what we communicated during the spring in the IPO process, that we were going to take in more cash and invest that predominantly in building up the US sales and marketing organization, is already starting to pay off. And this is what we've been busy doing. In the US, by far and away the most important market that we're in, we're now targeting 10 target states and 20 metropolitan areas. We've set up our own OssDsign office between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore on the East Coast. In that office, you can find the VP of Commercial Operations, our Operations Director for the US, and an Area Director, Sales Director for the East Coast. We also have representation in the Central US and on the West Coast. And during the year, we're also supporting this team with technical sales managers in other key areas such as Florida, Texas, and the San Francisco Bay Area. And the intention then with this organization is they're going to work alongside our distribution network and support them and help them drive sales. So that's the model in the US. In summary, I think we're well positioned for strong growth going forward. We see continued good results in our direct European markets. The growth in the US accelerates as a result of the investments we have made with the money we took in during the IPO process. And we're about to launch into very important and interesting markets, France and Japan. On the product side, we just introduced Cranial Plug as our first off-the-shelf product based on the same technology. We are looking to do line extensions on the Cranial Plug for specialized surgical procedures such as evacuation of subdural hematomas. And we will also, during next year, accelerate activities for our facial implants to start driving that and building that market as well. That will also, at some point, be followed by regulatory filing in the US. So, to conclude, this is a bit of our mindset. If you don't serve patients every day, make sure you serve someone who does. And I would like to take this opportunity just to show you a short case that will serve as a good example of the lives we get to be part of improving and sometimes even maybe saving. This is a CT from a lady who arrived in Sweden a couple of years ago. She came from a country in Africa. She had a plaque meningioma. As you can see, it's a big tumor that grows through her skull bone. You can see the part that's growing outwards, but you can't see the part that was growing inwards. She came to the hospital complaining about headaches. The doctors gave her a limited time to live initially. But through a collaboration between our design engineers and the team at the hospital, really in depth, we were able to help them with the design of a couple of implants, the surgical tools, and also related to the surgical procedure itself. So really a collaborative work that eventually saved this lady, and this is a couple of months after her 2 first surgical procedures, where more than 70% of her skull was replaced with an artificial implant from OssDsign. We even made the news. She made the news, to be honest. We didn't. Yeah. So with that, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrik. Fascinating work that you're doing.
Thank you.
I'm just going to jump straight into the market situation.
Yep.
You mentioned that you had changed the strategy in the US, which is a very big market.
Yeah, well, can I just
sure.
Can I comment on the question?
Yes.
It's really not a change in the strategy. This is a planned thing since we started working with the master distributor. That when a couple of trigger points happened, we were going to take over. So this was planned. Everyone knew about it, and we're just executing according to plan. So we're not changing strategy. We are, but it's planned. So it's just a distinction to make.
I stand corrected.
Oh, that's fine.
So the process of gaining uptake in the U.S. market and adding more more footprints, so to speak. Can you give us a short description of how that works in your case?
Yeah, I mean, in our case, since this is it's a bit of a niche market. It's not a surgical procedure that is done in large volumes everywhere. So what's really key for us is to get access to the centers and the hospitals and the surgeons who actually see high volumes of patients who specialize in this. And that we do best by building relations with the distribution partners that we have, because they have this access. The relation in the US between an orthopedic or neurosurgeon and their service rep could be very strong. So we're trying to tap into their network and make it profitable for them to sell our products, which also means that we need to make sure that they are well educated, that we're working closely with them, especially in the early ways, to kind of bring on new customers. And I think we've been fairly successful in that first part, and now we're about to kind of dig deeper into every account and build volume. So.
Well, you show the graph is going the right direction.
Yes, it's looking good. And what I didn't mention, which I should have mentioned, and as we mentioned in our Q3 report, is that this trend that we see in the US seems to be carrying over also in the fourth quarter this year.
Okay. And you also mentioned the fact that you received reimbursement or it's okay in France.
Yes.
So what would that mean on a larger scale for the company?
Yeah, difficult to say. I can't quantify it, obviously, but France is a big market. There's a lot of French people in France, so that's a good start. And what's even better is that, from our point of view, is that it's only 3 companies, 3 products that have access to this central reimbursement system. So we believe that we can quite quickly get to a pretty decent market share in France. And despite that we haven't formally launched yet, we're already selling in France. So that's a good, probably a good sign that. You know,
I was going to say that's a good start to selling before you start
selling. Before you launch is always the preferred way. Yeah.
Is there any questions from the audience? Yes.
Could you maybe give financial guidance or long-term goals or anything? When do you reach break-even?
I cannot. We have not communicated any such goals. I think the only thing we have said is prior to the IPO that we will reach a turnover on 200 million SEK in 2023. So.
Are you on track?
We hope so.
Yeah. Another question?
Just a question about the product. Will your implant be replaced by the patient's own bone eventually, or is it only the edges that will grow together with the patient's bone?
That's a good question. Obviously, it's difficult for us to study this on a larger scale in human because we just would not get the ethical approval to do that. We have, however, studied explant data, which is also published in World Neurosurgery in our publication from last year, where we see that it is not only at the perimeter that bone builds in the implant. It's also actually in the center of the implant. So that process will continue, but it's obviously a slow process. We see the same type of pattern in preclinical studies, that it's not only about the border and fusion, it's also actually within the implant itself.
How important is the I think you mentioned gathering clinical data, well, from patient use. How important is that the quantification of that data for your future sales, so to speak? Can you?
Clinical data is always it's key in medical devices and especially in implants, and it should be. You want that as a potential patient yourself. So yes, we are constantly looking for collaborations with key opinion leading surgeons to gather more data. Now, as I mentioned, the surgical volumes are rather low. The patient population is quite heterogeneous when you look at cranioplasty patients. So making this big randomized controlled trial is difficult or would take a very long time. So what we're doing now is instead we're engaging with the clinical community to set up clinical registries to be able to capture real data from their use of our products as well as other products. So it's going to take a while, but it's something that we see as key and something that we're happy to be part in driving and investing in.
Thank you very much, Henrik.
Thank you.
If there are more questions, we have one more question in the back. That's the final one. So I have to repeat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to read. How do you look at your cost of sales and the cost? No, sorry.
Yeah, cost of customer acquisition.
Cost of customer acquisition and cost of an operation. Long term.
Long term, yeah. What I can say is that right now, which is in accordance with the plans we presented or during the spring, is that we'll be using the proceeds from the IPO to invest in market-related activities, predominantly in the US, but also in Europe and in future also in Japan. this will lead to that you see an increased burn rate, but hopefully we can turn that around already next year, or start seeing that the burn rate shrinks. So that's probably the best answer I can give.
Well, thank you very much, Henrik.